So let's talk about all the Warhammer 40K releases that we know that are coming out, and a few that we don't. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd do a big roundup of the Warhammer 40K release calendar, particularly with Games Workshop going pretty reveal and release heavy over the past few months. In a previous reveal show we got this roadmap, 4 nightly codexes, then Space Marines and Votann, but they didn't give us much indication as to what's coming in the future. For this one I thought we could talk through all the releases that we know about, starting with the stuff that's just come out, stuff on pre-order, and things that are likely to be soon, and move forward to the future and get more speculative from there. First up, and starting with some current promo miniatures that come out throughout the year, they have a few miniatures that might be turning up locally for different people. The store anniversary miniature this year is Bioscience Terminators, a spooky Genestealer called Pure Strain Genestealer clutching a Blood Angel's head, looking very Space Hulk there. I wonder if that could be any sort of hint to a reboot of the game. In any case, they tend to be on sale in local Warhammer stores around the world when they have their anniversary, so they might be released nearby for some. Otherwise, they also have their event-exclusive miniature in a Genestealer Cult unique primer sculpt, maybe not so enormously different from the standard one, but in a different pose. They tend to be on sale at Games Workshop endorsed events and tournaments, so again could be a local thing, though in reality very few people around the world are likely to have the chance to pick them up. For other promo miniatures, they've got their Warhammer Plus miniature. This one's Inquisitor Ostromandius. You can get him if you sign up to a 4-year subscription. An Inquisitor model with a servo skull and a disturbing Vox servitor. The next reveal for the Warhammer Plus miniatures should be at least fairly soon. They normally tend to renew them in August, so I guess we'll find out about the new one for this year in the not too very distant future. For their current release cycle though, only just going on full sale is the Saturnine box set. That was on pre-order just over 2 weeks ago now, the big launch box for the Horus Heresy with all the stuff in it. Really quite an expensive box set at £195 or $315, but still quite a big discount compared with buying these separately, around about 50% and a bit more generous than normal discount sets. It doesn't really translate directly over to Warhammer 40k for every miniature quite as easily, though I have seen some talk of say using the Saturnine Terminators as Centurions or Obliterators. The Tactical Marines can certainly do well enough for Chaos Legionaries. As I talked about in a recent video, supply of these was very good from Games Workshop and certain stores overstocked, and it has meant that in some places around the world there's some pretty enormous discounts on that box set. Whaling Games in the UK has them at 35% off at least at time of recording. I'll leave them linked in the video description below. It seems that when marked down for £127 for a deal that looked already fairly good at around about 200ish, I have seen a lot more people considering picking one up who otherwise definitely wouldn't have. Moving on to things currently on pre-order though, last weekend we got the pre-orders for 4 Warhammer 40k Combat Patrols plus 2 Codexes. There's Combat Patrol Tyranids with the Parasite and Mortrex, 10 Genestealers, 3 Tyrant Guard or Hive Guard, and a Biovore or Pyrovore. It's maybe not a terrible expansion set for people who've got a lot of the Leviathan pattern miniatures perhaps. Nice to have another option for a Tyranid discount deal. I feel like reception on it has been a bit mixed though. The points are a bit low and it does have one set of older models in there. Half of it's really quite good in game and the other half less so much. For Space Wolves, they were also waiting for their Combat Patrol. This one has the Terminators in it, so it was delayed and didn't come out with the rest of the more mainline Space Wolves release. Like the Tyranids one and the other Combat Patrols, it's £100 or $170. This one's got the Wolfguard Battle Leader, 10 Bloodclaws, 5 Wolfguard Terminators, and 5 Wolfen, the vast majority of those being new models for the big Space Wolf refresh, just the Wolfen being older. Overall though, it feels like a really solid Combat Patrol compared with the previous. Really nice to have a lot more theme and actually flavour miniatures in it, and literally all the units inside are really quite good in game at the moment. Bloodclaws quite enjoy having Ragnar Blackmane to lead them. Otherwise for the last weekend's pre-orders though, there were the Black Templars and Grey Knights. Codex Black Templars is a supplement to Codex Space Marines. They usually charge a little bit less at £20 or $35. There's 3 detachments in the book, one themed around Ancients, one themed around Chaplains, and one themed around Transports. And they added in a few data sheets as well, the new ones for the Crusade Ancient and the Execrator Chaplain, plus a few more variants for some core Codex Space Marine stuff. So far it seems to have been broadly quite well received. Their core rule makes the standard Templars on foot with chainswords and power weapons really quite dangerous against tough stuff, and that certainly feels like a strong start to add to whatever else they're running. For their new miniatures, they have the Crusade Ancient. He's £26 or $42, a knightly guy with a great big banner with an orc skull on it that you can swap out for a shield. In game he allows your units to fight on death on a 4+. He can gain some objective control if his unit destroys other units, and is perhaps the focal unit for one banner bearer led detachment. Generally his model was pretty well received. It's got some fun details like the sort of navigator style skull thing with the third eye on it, and it's perhaps surprisingly punchy in melee for what you'd expect as an ancient. Some of the other Black Templar characters do add a fair bit more on the damage dealing buffing front though. Next up, we've got the Execrated Chaplain. He's £25 or $40, and he's a unique variant chaplain for the army, leading from the front line with extreme prejudice, with the choice between a Pyre Pistol and a Power Sword. With the Power Sword, he's a pretty punchy threat in melee, a big attacks at damage too, and he allows his lead units to advance and charge as well, so quite nice for the Templar detachments that don't have easy access to that. Again though, he does have some stiff competition for leader characters, just with the sheer amount of damage say marshals or their named characters can have. Alongside the Black Templars, they've got their new Combat Patrol box set. This one again will be $170 or £100. It has the Emperor's Champion, a 10-man Crusader squad, 5 Sword Brethren, and a unit of Blade Guard veterans. Not an enormous amount of models in the box, but all really quite well received ones. People enjoy the appearances of the Blade Guard and the unique Templar stuff. There's around about 450 points in the box, and a usable enough discount. In general, it seems to have been a pretty popular update on the box set. Maybe having the Emperor's Champion as a named character isn't the most helpful thing in the world, though he is easy enough to kit bash into other models given the sheer amount of spare parts on the other kits. Otherwise, for recent Codex releases and releasing in tandem, we've got Codex Grey Knights. They have 5 detachments in their book. It is a fully standalone codex, this one. The new version of the Teleport Force has some more punchy damage rules, and there's a fun one with the Banishers with some lethal hits in melee, and a Dread Knight focused one. It was maybe a bit disappointing that the Grey Knights didn't get their model range update, which people are broadly expecting to be for 11th edition now, and there were some sad losses of certain character miniatures. Khaldor Drago's rule seemingly being lost in the warp was really quite a disappointment there. Their updated model for this release is the somewhat new Dread Knight, basically the old Dread Knight with a new upgrade sprue. The idea being that there's something a bit more specific visually to represent the Grandmaster datasheet, which has been a bit of an on-paper one for a while now. Added to the regular sprue, there's a big melter weapon called a Subliminator, a Nemesis Flail and a Nemesis Mace as another 2 melee weapon options, some frag storms on the chest, plus a few aesthetic bits. Currently we don't know the individual price for this, as it's first available in the Battleforce box set, though I guess it'll probably go up for the price tag that the Nemesis Dread Knight had before. It's not terrible to have some extra options, but at the same time the kit was received with a bit of an eye roll. Grey Knight players maybe not super enthused that Games Workshop haven't even given them an entirely new model for 10th edition, just a partial one. In the Codex, the rules for the new gear seems a little bit on the underwhelming side. The Twin Links Melter 4 Subliminator maybe feels like the best thing. The other melee weapons just don't really hit quite as hard as the hammer though. Talking of battle forces though, the Grey Knights get their Sanctic Conclave one. The Dread Knight with the Grandmaster is in there, with 2 sets of Terminators and 2 sets of 10 power armoured Grey Knights, all of which can be built as a whole bunch of different variants. The price for this one is £150 or $240, around about 25% or so versus buying them separately, depending exactly what they ask for the Grandmaster. Demand for these didn't look super high, but it certainly looks like it was better than the Grey Knight Combat Patrol box set that they were coming out with. As usual for these launch Battleforce box sets, it seems they were available in fairly tiny numbers, and particularly in North America. Games Workshop's web store seems to have already sold out. I suspect that plenty of people aren't super enthused if they think that Grey Knights are going to be getting a big range update at some stage, though at the same time it doesn't really feel the worse for starting the faction in the interim. There are quite a lot of points in the box relative to Games Workshop's normal offerings for these. Then finally for the Grey Knight release, there's the Combat Patrol set. This one probably shouldn't be too hard to find given that it's in quite low demands. Castellan Crow, 5 Terminators and 10 Strike Marines plus the Venerable Dreadnought. It still will have some appeal to some people, though a lot of people have been turned off by the Dreadnought in the box, just feeling like it's probably going to be a model that's phased out in the not too distant future, and in particular swapping out the faction unique Nemesis Dread Knight for the more generic Space Marine style Dreadnought perhaps wasn't the best received thing either. Again, like the Battleforce box though, in terms of points for the money, it is one of the better ones on that metric, though if I had to rate one of the Grey Knight discount offerings as the better one, it'd be the Battleforce box set for me. Then starting to look to the future for things not on pre-order yet, we've got the next week's release wave, and it seems that Games Workshop's had at least a fairly fast turnaround on the Saturnine individual kits coming out, so that components of the box going on sale individually, so things like the Arachne platform, the characters, the Saturnine Dreadnought and the Terminators. I'd guess that these might have slightly more limited interest due to a lot of people having picked them up from the box set itself. Probably the things that stood out to me the most though were the Dreadnought, which has a different set of weapons coming out, plus that was just one of the most enjoyed things about the box set, so there might be some people who didn't want the whole box but might be tempted by the Dreadnought individually. And the Terminators were kind of curious being boxed in sets of 4. I was guessing they were going to be sets of 6 as they're taken in units of between 3 and 6. 4 just seems a little bit awkward, as if you want to field a max size 6 squad, you basically need to have 2 box sets and then have 2 left over. You can just field them in multiple squads of 4 though, I suppose. One interesting thing for the next wave of Heresy things though is that the old drop pod is going back on sale. Games Workshop updated their Space Marine drop pods for Warhammer 40k, making them into a more sort of terrain piece type thing where the doors don't go up and down. It did make them easier to build, and I still feel like they visually look nice enough, plus it's a bit cheaper per pod, but lots of people like the sort of story of the old one, dropping them down and then spraying the doors open, so kind of nice that that's still there. That one's going to be going back on pre-order this Saturday as the Legions Astartes drop pod. Bear in mind that for 40k purposes they do have slightly different profiles though. The terrain one has some slightly shorter doors. They're fine enough for casual games of 40k, though grand tournaments might have a little bit more problems. Before we move on to the future, I'll just talk about another release that's recently come out, this one from the video sponsor Greytide Studio. Greytide Studio specialise in aesthetic designs for upgrading your various power armoured warriors with a bit more theme, and their latest range is called the Anvil Wardens, all very nice for some finely crafted war gear with some dragon style theming. Their parts are available for STLs from 3D printing, both via My Mini Factory and Colts 3D, and they also have some print-on-demand services via Only Games. You can find them all linked in the video description. They generally tend to sell their bits either as one big bit set or as individual blocks. They have lots of different bits packs around the sort of $10 mark. For their bits though, I think they've got some fun stuff. They've got some pretty fun Dragon Knight style helmeted heads, plus a bunch of Scarred and Scorched Bear ones, plus some big Rebreather style ones. Some on-theme toppers for backpacks, some small dragon skull type things, some flaming effigies, plus some on-theme backpacks with trinkets and small burning torches. They've got some shields and fists and things. I feel like shields are quite a good way to add a bit of theme to an army. There's some pretty nice shoulder pads to swap out some more plain ones for. And some nice scaled capes, maybe for some veterans perhaps. Lots of those are available separately, though they do have a massive great big pack that contains everything. That's $38 or local equivalent, and they gave me a code Greytide X Auspex, which I'll leave down in the video description. That one saves 20% on anything. In any case though, thanks to them for sponsoring this one, and there'll be links down in the video description below. Moving on to some other, perhaps more near-term stuff that hasn't been officially announced for release yet. And first up, we have the store anniversary Captain Centos. He's either to celebrate 200 North American stores or 500 stores between the USA and Europe, supposedly. Either way, he's a commemorative Space Marine captain who's only going to be available to buy in Warhammer stores. He has the option of a head swap for a sort of laurel wreath one, and harks back to a classic Space Marine captain who also got reinterpreted for a store anniversary around about 10 years ago now. He might have some Legends rules, but it's not going to be a permanent addition to the range, and it's easy enough to represent with a standard Space Marine captain datasheet anyway. Otherwise, for things in the nearest future, there's a couple of box sets that are going to other retailers around the world and aim to be sort of introductory games to the Warhammer 40k setting, and are sold in places like Target, Barnes & Noble, and some equivalent shops of plenty of places around the world. Both of them are potentially good deals in terms of money for the miniatures, depending on what you're after, though particularly the Dawn of War Onslaught box set. This one basically has a very valuable sprue, originally from the Indomitors box set, the one with the Judaseer, the Chaplain, the Blade Guard Ancient, 3 Blade Guard and 3 Eradicators on it, and it's being sold in Target in the USA for just $50. Not too bad given that Games Workshop usually charges $170 from that sprue, and it's only available direct. It does sound like they've gone out to a fair few locations in the USA. Obviously very heavy demand for them though, so they're probably going to be hard to track down. In a similar kind of offering as well, for one I believe that's coming out in the not too distant future, this one's the Kill Team Beginner set. It looks like this one's a similar kind of price. $50 in the USA. I've seen it listed in a couple of other stores, including Elbenvold in Germany, and Aussie Collectibles and GameSphere AEU in Australia. It's $85 Australian there. This one basically has a very slightly slimmed down version of the Kill Team starter set box. 5 Space Marines from the Justinian Force and 5 from the Death Guard Force, basically from 2 different series of Space Marine heroes originally. These sculpts have often had quite a big price tag before, so it's kind of nice to get 2 squads for just potentially $50. For more experienced collectors, it's just kind of notable that a single Space Marine character from Games Workshop often costs in around about $40 or so. So if you wanted either a Malignant Plague Caster or Space Marine Captain, you essentially get 9 other quite nice sculpts of Games Workshop miniatures on top of that, for not that much more. I did see reaction to this one be a lot more mixed though. I guess the squads don't translate over super neatly to 40k purposes, and if you're trying to play Kill Team, then having one fewer model in the box than what you'd ideally need isn't great. I personally still rate this as quite a nice one for miniatures to add to a collection kind of deal, provided you're an experienced collector and you understand the product. Hopefully in the not too distant future, we're also waiting on the release of a bunch of 40k miniatures too. The ones that came out as the new miniature for the Deity Legions, they were in their starter Battleforce box sets, but then they have to wait for their individual release. First among these, we've got the World Eater Slaughterbound. I guess likely to be £26 or $42. Basically a fairly enormous 8-bound with a great big chain cleaver style thing, possessed by a bloodletter in the lore, and is usable enough in game, particularly surging up the board with a unit of 8-bound, and then hitting things really hard in combat to add extra weight to the unit's attacks. For the Death Guard, there's the Lord of Poxes, the third of their 3 named lords to be released. He's got a great big contagion generator on his back and a massive plague blade. I'd also expect him to be a similar sort of price tag. Unfortunately, he's not particularly strong in game though at the moment. I guess that these guys might well drop with the next major Warhammer 40k release wave, whenever that is, maybe with Imperial Knights, Space Marines or Votann, whichever comes first. Then for the Thousand Suns, we've got the Sekitar robots, the sort of ancient Egyptian statue sentinel robots that they have. I guess for their pricing around about £34 or $58, maybe similar to the field ordnance batteries from the Guard. I feel like they're usable enough to fill the infiltrate role for the Thousand Suns, though maybe do feel a little costly for what they do. Their models initially had a bit of mixed reception, though I feel like people are maybe warming up to them a little. They do look a bit static, but trying to go for somewhere between statue and robots, that was probably going to be slightly inevitable. I guess to add to those, we can add the new Dread Knight as waiting for an individual plastic release as well. As mentioned, currently on pre-order in the Santic Conclave box set, so slightly awkwardly in the meantime you can't even buy regular Dread Knights if you did want to collect them for Grey Knights, and I really wouldn't be too surprised if they decide to put up the price for the extra sprue in the box set. That does often tend to be the way. Beyond stuff that is either near future or is in pre-existing release waves though, we'll be continuing with the rest of the Codex rollout. At least what they've put on the roadmap so far would really imply Imperial Knights next, though it's hard to know whether that's going to be the case given that they've had repeated delays. In any case, after this section of the roadmap, we already had Chaos Knights, and then have checked off Black Templars and Grey Knights. The Imperial Knight Codex seems to have been delayed multiple times in 10th edition for some reason. On their very bad roadmap that they published last year, it was sort of nebulously early in 2025, the graphics sort of vaguely implying that it might be after Guard and Eldari, but when they released those and then revisited the roadmap, they were nowhere to be seen once again. Then I think most people were expecting it to come out alongside Chaos Knights, as it was next to them on the subsequent roadmaps, particularly given that they look like they've had a pretty similar release, basically adding another upgrade sprue into the standard Knight box set for each one of them. In the past they've released them in tandem, such as in 9th edition where they both had a dual release weekend. It seemed very likely that they were building up to do that, but instead Games Workshop didn't come out with a Knight Codex and gave them a rules update instead, so basically adjusted all their stat lines and gave them weirdly decreased points costs, which did seem a bit unusual for a Codex that we're expecting in the not too distant future. I can't help but think that the original plan would have likely been to have both codexes come out at the same time, so you wouldn't have to do some sort of extra steps with a digital interim index. Between those and the roadmaps keeping on getting pushed back, it feels like the only logical explanation is that there's some sort of problem with one of the products they want to release while the Imperial Knights come out. And if that's the case, it would either be a problem with the new Imperial Knight Codex or the Knight Defender in some way. Maybe they put something in the Knight Codex that's so wrong or so embarrassing it needed to get reprinted again, or perhaps there's some sort of problem with the Knight Defender molds. So far they didn't really say anything, they just said that Codex Imperial Knights is still a little way off, and they'll give us a release date as soon as they decide on one. For what we do know of the nightly release so far though, we've got a codex with a fairly epic looking Knight Castellan on the cover, blazing away at all guns firing. Currently they're kind of problematically powerful in game, so I can't imagine a codex is actually going to make them into a stronger army or anything like that, but hopefully might give them some other interesting ways and different styles to play. They stated there's going to be 4 detachments in the book similar to the Chaos Knights, and if they go down the similar sort of pattern to that, we got 2 general purpose ones for them, and then one that was focused on Titanic Knights and one that was focused on War Dogs. It does seem pretty plausible that they could do similar. For the new model release to come out with the Knights, it's the Knight Defender, an upgrade sprue for the Questoris Knight box, and it sounds like this one's going to be sold with one box with the Knight Defender in it, and then a different box that builds the Preceptor and Canis Rex, so the option of the 2 different upgrade sprues, and they still build all the other variants. In any case, this one has a great big shield generator on the top of it, so likely to protect other knights, plus a big plasma cannon and a conversion beam weapon. I'd guess it'll probably be the same price as the Ruinator, and that one's £120 or $200 or €155. I wonder if it might prompt an increase to the currently on sale Heresy era Knight Questoris kits that's on sale from Games Workshop. It would be kind of strange to have that one at a lower price point. They gave us a few teasers about the weapons and its role, but it looks like it's maybe going to have a slightly weird overlap with the Knight Castellan. That one's also got a great big plasma gun that's going to be good against elite infantry. Conversion weapons in 10th edition tend to do more sustained hits on a 4+, at least if you can keep them in optimal range. It's likely to be a good gun against tanks, and then the shield will help out other knight durability nearby somehow. There are multiple ways they could realise that. Maybe the most logical one might be invulnerable save boosting, but they tend to be quite creative with their durability mechanics in 40k. It could be things like feel no pains or reducing AP or something. It means that the knight won't get any of the top hatch upgrades, things like the Storm Sphere pod. Aside from the shield rule, it'll get some sort of bondsman ability type one, or the rest also have something that buffs armigers. For another release that's likely to be in the medium term, there's Kill Team Tomb World. This one's the next Versus box for Kill Team, and it has 10 Primaris Deathwatch in it, the Necron Canoptech Circle led by a Geomancer, a set of the Necron Warriors with their attendant Scarab Swarms, and then quite a fun terrain set with a Necron Tomb World interior, so some nice faction themed stuff there. I guess that this one might be a similar sort of pricing to Kill Team Typhon, that was £100 or $170. As ever with Kill Team box sets, I suspect that this one's going to be in disappointingly short supply. Aside from their edition launch box sets, they tend to be a bit depressingly fast to sell out. The miniatures themselves will be on sale here first though, and then come out individually. The Deathwatch kill teams were pretty well received as model looks go. It's really nice to see some actual updates for the Deathwatch for a faction that Games Workshop just introduced the models for and then basically haven't done anything with since. There's 10 Primaris Marines in the set, basically 2 sets of 5 of them, each with dual builds. Each set of 5 has a Gravis Marine and a Phobos Marine. They do keep a whole bunch of their iconic options with their Heavy Thunder Hammers, Infernus Heavy Bolters and Frag Cannons and things, plus a cool Xenophase Blaze. I guess when they release for a full kill team set, they'll probably have quite an expensive final pricing, probably around £47 or $80 or so, and it will be interesting to see an updated 40k datasheet for them, likely replacing the Firstborn Deathwatch Veterans one which will go to Legends. They have taken that box set off sale now. Probably feel like people enjoy the models well enough, but perhaps they're maybe just a little bit more plain than faction elites might have been, and it does seem kind of likely that the squad's going to reflect their war gear very closely when they do get a datasheet, so I suspect that a bit of freeform customization will be lost, as has been the case with 40k for some time now. Here's them all together though, with a bunch of their options on display. I do quite like the Gravis Marines with their Frag Cannon, Infernus Heavy Bolter and the Heavy Bolt Rifle. You can basically build 2 out of the 3 of those in this kit. There's a nice Storm Shield one on the right and a Plasma Incinerator on the left there. Similar to the last one, they do also come with a whole bunch of chapter shoulder pads, and I feel like that's quite a fun feature. In the same box set as them, there's also the Necron Canoptech Circle with a Geomancer Cryptek to lead it. This one's reviving a Cryptek from the lore from a long time past, and it's basically being an architect and engineer that maintains the Tomb Worlds, that is capable of summoning some Canoptech horrors from dark recesses to repel any invaders to the tomb. It's quite a cool miniature with a bunch of hovering Blackstone Menhir type things. The Geomancer is going to be part of a Canoptech Circle squad, a bunch of Plasmacyte style things called Macrocytes. One of them's a Reanimator that might be a medic to boost the unit, and then a bit of fire support with some Tomb Crawlers. It looks like they're going to be a skirmishy sort of retinue. They don't look like enormous damage dealers. It'll be interesting to see how the Geomancer functions, whether it can attach to other units, and what sort of arcane technical tricks it can bring to the battlefield. Then, as mentioned, there's some faction-specific terrain in the box set as well. Quite nice to see some internal bits of a tomb world here with a bunch of sleeping Necron warriors. They seem to have done this in a similar sort of way to the Necron Convergence of Dominion, a whole bunch of stonework that's crumbling away to reveal the Blackstone technology underneath. It's probably not going to be the most useful for mainstream 40k games. I suspect that you could probably make use of it for boarding actions, though it would probably take a fair bit of work to make it fit the format of that. Also for kill team releases that'll probably come out at the same sort of time as this are the ones from the last Versus box set. They tend to have a big release weekend where they have the new box and then the previous kill teams going up for sale. These ones are the Servitor Battleclade with their commanding Underseer miniature. They already have their 40k rules as a fairly cheap chaff unit for the AdMech, but still having a bit of punch with the Gun Servitors. They've got some rules around doing actions and staying on the move and shooting. I'm sure there's at least a fair few Tyranids players looking forward to getting their hands on some Raveners though. These ones came out in the same box set and have some fun hyper-adaptive versions that you can see here. They've been an interesting unit for the Subterranean Assault, and just really quite a punchy, hard-hitting squad in general for the upgraded version. I'm sure they'll be a popular kit with quite a lot of Tyranids players out there. Both of these will probably be in the normal sort of kill team price range, I guess probably £42 or around $65 or so for the AdMech one. The Tyranids are likely to be at least the same, if not maybe a bit more. I guess we'll also have the subsequent solo release of both the Necrons and the Deathwatch. That'll be another 3 months or so down the line. Talking of kill team, they should also release the Tyranid Terrain as well. Again, that could be an interesting enough one to have some faction themed terrain for a very popular faction out there. It's really quite a big chunky terrain kit, some nice spore chimneys and nests of gaunts and things there. Finally for kill team, I've also noticed that there's a couple of kits being reboxed for Warhammer 40k as well. I guess this will now be a regular occurrence as they basically retire the kill teams from the game modes that came out first. And I think that the idea is that when they've been around for 3 years or more, they now give them some sort of legacy or legend style rules, and then the kit will be taken out of the kill team packaging and re-released in Warhammer 40,000 packaging. To that end, it seems that the Orc Commandos and the Sisters Novitiate are both sold out online. I don't know if there's a chance they might actually come back at a very slightly lower price tag if they're not having kill team counters and upsells and things in the box. That certainly seems very possible that doesn't happen though, if Games Workshop's already been selling them at one amount. Before jumping back into the Codex cycle, there's also a few other things that have been announced, but we don't know exactly when they're coming. I guess in the sort of mid-term future, seeing as we've seen them, and Games Workshop don't tend to have an enormous lag time between reveals and releases. There's a couple of things for the Horus Heresy that might have some interest to Warhammer 40k, the Fellblade Super Heavy Battle Tank. So basically the Space Marine Baneblade is getting a kit. This one does have some Legends rules for Warhammer 40k. I'm sure it's been on some people's wish lists. It should be significantly cheaper than the resin version of the kit, though I'm sure it'll be quite a costly one still. At the latest preview, they also showed off their Mark II Assault Squad as well. So a bunch of angry looking Space Marines in Crusade armour and armed with chain axes. They've got the more standard bolt pistol and chain weapon sort of loadout, and also a Storm Shield equipped one. This one certainly feels like they could be an interesting choice to represent Raptors in game, perhaps particularly for some of the legions that are known to be less corrupted than some. Maybe armies like the Alpha Legion or the Iron Warriors might enjoy. Coming out in a box set of 10 also doesn't tend to hurt on that front, you usually tend to get some slightly better value out of it. It's worth mentioning some upcoming things on the Combat Patrol magazine as well. This one will be very location specific, with all sorts of countries having the run started now. This one's the Hachette Parkworks magazine from Games Workshop. You can subscribe to it and get Warhammer deliveries. Overall it's a bit of a discount, though not an enormous one. And basically built towards this enormous collection of miniatures on the right, a whole bunch of different 40k factions being represented, mostly based on their 9th edition combat patrols. In the UK we're around up to 47 to 48 out of a 90 issue run, and in the USA they're around about 17 or so. Currently in the UK that means that there's some Orks kits that are cheaper than normal. You can pre-order magazines as singles from Forbidden Planet, which will be linked below, usually costing £10 each plus a little postage and packaging, and getting a bit more efficient if you order a whole bunch of copies at once. The best deals on sale there at the moment are a set of Ork Death Copters for £26 including postage and packaging, so around about 40% off buying from Games Workshop, and the same sort of thing for the Death Dread. For both of those you need 2 issues, so 47 and 48 for the Death Copters and 49 and 50 for the Death Dread. The prices get a bit better in terms of discount for multiple orders, so you don't have to pay for more postage. Otherwise though, for the UK the next run is going to be Votann, and there'll also be a good one for the Orks with the Boomdaka Snazwagon as well. A fair few issues that either individually or when put together can save a bit versus Games Workshop. It looks like the absolute standout deals of this one though might be the standard Carl on his own. Not bad for £13.50 I suppose including delivery, though certainly the Boomdaka Snazwagon for the Orks and the Einir Hearthguard. How good the deals are around the world though will depend on whether or not you can buy issues individually. I think they're only available in certain countries, or you could consider for subscribing to either the whole run or part of it, depending on what you're after. Getting back to the primary 40k release roadmap though, next up it looks like it's Marines and Votann, and I guess that these are most likely to be sort of late summer to autumn releases. For Space Marines we had the previous teasers of chapter specific stuff, and then Leagues of Votann we've got their Codex and their second wave coming. We did hear about the Space Marines before Leagues of Votann, which might imply that they could be first. I'm honestly not sure which order they'll come out in though. Games Workshop certainly could surprise us. The Space Marine release wave seems to focus on the non-Ultramarines chapters and combat patrols, and each of the other big 5 more Codex chapters get one new or updated character. If they need new rules then they'll be available via digital download. They'll have a lore sequence released digitally as well, and each chapter getting a run of custom dice as well. Each of the Codex chapters also gets a combat patrol box set, many of which are just generally useful to Space Marines as a whole, though a few are a bit more chapter locked. At the preview they didn't really show any further hints of more chapter specific rules or detachments, but if they did want to invest a bit more in Space Marine stuff, they could well make some chapter locked detachments if they'd like to. That feels like it'd be a relatively low effort thing to release digitally if they'd want to. Going through the new characters though, and we've got Vulcan Hestarn, the Salamander's Forge Father and Relic Hunter updated from old fine cast resin into new shiny plastic. In general people quite liked his plastic miniature, and it sounds like he's going to have relatively similar rules on his datasheets to what he has now. I suspect that these characters are going to be at this normal sort of epic hero kind of price tag from Games Workshop, so that'll be around £28, €34 or $45. For the White Scars we've finally got a biker character in Subodhan Khan. He is riding a Primaris jet bike with an Onslaught Gatling cannon out the front, and fighting with a power lance, apparently the leader of their Spearpoint Brotherhood 1st Company at the moment. Interesting to see a Primarch jet bike as well. Certainly raises the possibility as to whether or not we'll get some entire units of these. I'd guess that his price tag is going to be a fair bit higher than the rest. Games Workshop do charge quite a lot for mounted characters. He might be at the sort of Marshall Dreyer £37 or $60 kind of mark. For the Iron Hands, we've got Karnok Var. He's a heavily augmented Terminator captain of Clan Ivanii, and all very rational and uncompromising strategist as you'd expect. He's got some fun servo skulls to imbibe some data and plan out the destruction of a fortress, it looks like. Plus he's got a great big power Tetsubo that he's armed with, a sort of ceremonial Japanese club. It'll be interesting to find out the rules for him. He very much looks like an augmented command and control style miniature, even if I'm still sure that power maul will leave a mark. Next up, we've got the rather stunning miniature of Ethon Shan of the Raven Guard. This one was the best received out of the Primaris character releases. Looking pretty awesome as a jump pack character with lightning claws perched on his dead tree. He's got a few options for head swaps as well, plus a whole bunch of cool chapter specific themed bits like a feathery cape and some bird skulls and stuff, draped in some red tassels bearing the script of Deliverance. He's been promoted to chapter master after Shrike steps down. He decided that he wanted to be the Shadow Captain once again, as he was in the past. Finally, for the Imperial Fist, we've got Darnath Lysander, a big name in 40k and captain of the 1st Company, remodelled in big and chunky Terminator armour. The Fist of Dawn looking better than ever with a sculpted eagle on the back of it. He now gets a head swap and a very solid looking storm shield. Certainly pretty nice to see some more representation for other chapters beyond Ultramarines out of the core codex. It does make me think this would be quite nice to even the score a bit and give the Undivided Chaos Legions a turn as well. As mentioned, releasing alongside them are a whole bunch of combat patrols for Space Marines. They might well be of interest to their individual chapters, but are pretty good for Space Marines in general. The Iron Hands one is an odd box set though. 2 5-strike servo turrets, 10 heavy intercessors and a tech marine. Not necessarily a terrible supporting force if you wanted to add these as extra elements into the army. It doesn't really feel like a particularly good feels good box set in terms of points or plastic though. And maybe it doesn't help that the units within aren't generally considered top tier competitive ones or anything like that. Having said that though, none of them are really unusable in casual games. It does seem to be the one with the most niche appeal out of any of them though. Then we've got the Raven Guard Combat Patrol. This one's all generic units once again, though they do get a chapter specific transfer sheet. For this one there's an Invicta Tactical Warsuit, 10 Infiltrators or Incursors, 5 Jump Intercessors and a Jump Captain. It does feel pretty on point theme wise for the Raven Guard. Quite nice to have a big centerpiece vehicle in the box set too, and it means there's quite a lot of points in the box as well. As it goes, this one was quite a lot more popular. Obviously depends on whether or not you want a bunch of Furboss and Jump Troops though. For the White Scars, they get Sabodin Khan in this one, plus 3 Outriders, 5 Assault Intercessors and an Impulsor. Sabodin being in the box set might make it just a bit more niche, and it does also mean that his individual release will likely be delayed a good time, as they'll sell this and then put him on sale individually it seems. This one had a bit of a mixed reception really. It is kind of low for points in the box unless Sabodin winds up being far more than you'd expect. The Outriders are kind of basic miniatures as well, but everything's usable enough, and Corsaro Khan could fight pretty hard with the Assault Intercessors jumping out of the Impulsor. For Salamanders, their one had Adrax Agatone, 3 Eradicators, 10 Infernus Marines, 5 Assault Intercessors and an Invader ATV. So quite a lot of Space Marine plastic, but for a bunch of reasons it just might not be super desirable for any one thing. Non-Salamanders players might be a little bit less enthused by Adrax. The Infernus Marines might be a thing that a lot of people have loads of from the Leviathan box sets. The Assault Intercessors aren't bad, but people had lots of them from 9th edition and don't have loads of excitement as basic troops, and the Invader ATV tends to be one of the less loved 40k models. It's routinely got voted really quite low in terms of people not enjoying it within the Space Marine lineup. It does have a fairly good amount of points in the box set though, at about 500 and an okay discount, but I still feel like there's a lot of units that might just put off people for one reason or another. Finally though, and perhaps the best received one, is the Combat Patrol Imperial Fists. This one has the company heroes in it, with the captain with the 4 guys, the standard multi-part Terminator kit, 5 heavy intercessors and 5 regular ones, really on theme for the Imperial Fist with a bunch of punchy bolters and then some chapter elites. And having the Terminators in there plus the company heroes with their captain means that it costs quite a lot of points in game. It gets you 535 points on the board. They just feel like they're fairly central and broadly appealing Space Marine units that could be used by a bunch of chapters, and besides the standard intercessors, all notably quite recent sculpts as well. 2 of the boxes being from 10th edition and the heavy intercessors from being sort of mid-9th. It certainly looks like this one's the box set that most people want to buy when I did some polls on the subject. Then around about the same time, judging by Games Workshop's teasers and roadmap, there's the Leagues of Votann Wave 2 coming. They of course were introduced towards the later end of 9th edition, so haven't been around in 40k that long. Most people were expecting Games Workshop to have another wave of kits coming, and it seems like to that end they haven't disappointed too much. 6 new model kits alongside their new Codex and their Combat Patrol. Again, if I had to guess, I'd probably say around about September time or so for these, maybe in a similar sort of slot to when their range first went out. For their new miniatures, they've got a few new characters. There's an Arcanist Evaluator, a sort of Votann scientist guy, field testing a transmatter inverter, a gun that looks kind of short-ranged but has 3 different fire modes and I'm sure is going to be suitably devastating, and he'll be a lone operative while he's near other infantry, and maybe wouldn't be too surprised if he's a little bit cheaper than certain other Games Workshop characters they've come out with. It feels a bit more like a support character as opposed to a main event one. Maybe in a similar sort of vein, there's a Memnir Strategist. He's an Ironkin model who allows you to manipulate your yield score, and that's the new mechanic for the Codex, plus being able to coordinate a free heroic intervention or overwatch for a unit. They said that he could join the new Ironkin squad. His model was pretty well enjoyed, an all very crafty looking Ironkin with a bunch of floating brains plugged into his back, and it's got some cool robes as well. Apparently he'll be able to lead the Ironkin Steeljacks. This one's going to be a 3 model elite box set of big chunky war constructs for those, so they stand significantly taller than the regular kin. Their main weapons are some heavy Vulcanite disintegrators if you field them in the ranged loadout. They can swap it out for bolters and either plasma swords or concussion gauntlets for a more mixed melee loadout. Apparently they also get the chance to get some precision hits when they target things on objectives, and they repeatedly describe them as really quite durable on their stream. I guess they might be a bit expensive for the points on the board, maybe a similar sort of price to the Brokir Thunderkin. Next up, they've got some artillery pieces in the Chthonian Earthshakers. Interesting sort of inverted artillery pieces that are a throwback to previous mole mortars, firing the mole mortar things on the ground which burrow up and explode in the midst of the enemy. They had 2 different shells for them, one to deal damage and one that sounds like it's to slow down enemies. It seems they're going for the sort of Chthonian augmented guy aesthetic for these guys, so a little bit similar to the Berserks. Then we've got a new light vehicle model. This one's the Capricus Defender or Carrier. Apparently this one's here to transport Hernkin Jaegers around. The Carrier is the transport version and it gets some auto cannons both on the front and the top. And then there's the Defender version that you can see pictured on the left. That one gets a different primary weapon, either a high-las weapon or a Magna rail cannon, plus a couple of grenade launcher style things to either side of the vehicle too. It maybe does feel like it's fighting for a bit of a niche in the Codex with the Statutor perhaps, though I guess they'll transport different things and they might well be able to differentiate them a bit by their special rules. Finally, for their new models, they've got a fun named character called Buri Agneson, apparently the last surviving member of a Votann league that was devoured by the Tyranids, who's had various bits of him devoured or digested over the years, so he has quite a lot of bionics and is fighting with a bunch of relics from his kin. The big weapon's called Bane of the Darkstar Glaive. He'll be a lone operative, will be good against monsters and just a generally threatening melee stat line, and he's got a 2+ chance to revive on death. That's generally a very handy thing to have as a lone operative, as it's kind of efforts to get damage on them in the first place, so you might not be able to shoot then charge them, and you can stand up again and have another go. Alongside all that, they'll have their Combat Patrol coming out. This one has an Ironhair Champion, 3 Brokir Thunderkin, 10 Hearthkin Warriors, and an Ironhair Hearthguard unit. Currently it's around about 390 points pre-Codex, and sort of middling-ish discounts. People felt that this one wasn't really too dissimilar to the old one in terms of desirability, both of them being some staple units, though it doesn't contain any of the new ones which might have been helpful for current Votann collectors. All of this will come out alongside their new Codex. This one's got 21 datasheets in it, and it's 144 pages long. The main previews that they gave are that there were going to be yield points in the place of judgment tokens, saying that you earn them for taking objectives and destroying enemies on them, and then you can convert them to damage or defense in some way later. They mentioned getting rerolls and army-wide benefits to hit. I guess you have to spend certain amounts of points to defend your holdings once you've taken them. It'll be interesting to see some new detachments for them though, hopefully encouraging some different ways to play. They have had an element of being a fairly mono-themed army for a bunch of the edition. Hopefully between new units and new detachments that can help with that. That's perhaps the main end of the Codexes and reveals that have happened so far, but given Games Workshop's calendar and one of the Codex to come out, we know a whole bunch of other things that will be coming. I'm sure Games Workshop will be keeping the semi-regular preview shows coming. So far the next one isn't announced exactly when it'll be, though there's a reasonable chance it might be around the Nova Open as they've often done content there in the past. If so, that might air somewhere around August the 27th. Though if that's been confirmed on the event scheduling, I couldn't see it listed anywhere obviously. I feel like over the last couple of months there might have been a bit more of a drive to try and space out the reveal shows and have lots to show off with each one, so people don't tune into them and come away empty-handed. I think that the Nova Open was maybe a good example of that last time around. They basically said that there'd be a roadmap teaser, and it was a bit of a weird situation where they genuinely delivered some really interesting news, saying that there'd be an Aspect Warrior and a Deathcore of Krieg refresh, but delivered in a sort of in-passing way amongst a whole load of other things talking about stuff that had already come out. I feel like people would have had so much more excitement for it if they revealed, say, a model or some parts of a model, or potentially very explicitly set some expectations of what people would see if it wasn't going to be any new miniatures for 40k. If that's potentially somewhere towards the end of August, then the next balanced data slate should be shortly after that. For these ones in Warhammer 40k, they usually tend to do these every 3 months. The last one was early June, so around early September seems most likely. This will have some standard balance pass things, so updated points, FAQs and errata, a balanced data slate, and some new detachments for a few armies these days. It seems they're doing 3 of those per release. I can't help but think that the balance hammer is going to swing down on the Death Guard and Imperial and Chaos Knights and maybe a couple of others, though hopefully not over-nerfing things so they remain strong but not outright weak. I'd at least guess that it might be a little bit less big in scope compared with the summer one, given that that had the new mission deck and everything going on at the same time. I feel like they often tend to have their biggest content drops in the summer and winter ones, at least slightly. For the end of the Codex cycle though, given that it seems likely that neither Deathwatch nor Chaos Demons seem to be getting a full-on 40k Codex for 10th edition, that's to leave the only mainline faction without a release as Drukhari, who I think are maybe hoping for a more generous release than normal. They really could do with a big release to fill the gaps in their range left by retired resin kits. They have plenty of units in their index at the moment that you just can't field. As I said previously when talking about these guys, it does feel like there's a better chance of getting that. The Leagues of Votann, Astra Militarum and World Eaters were the last books in 9th edition, and they all got big release waves going alongside them. It feels like Games Workshop only really wants to release really late codexes in the edition if there's something exciting to go along with it. We had it confirmed that Lady Malice is going to be getting a miniature at the very least, but there's loads of possibilities beyond that. Most obviously the kits that need replacements that aren't on sale anymore, the Grotesques, Court of the Archon, Beastmasters and Yuri and Rakath. Maybe a stretch goals beyond that though. It'd be really cool to see a big centerpiece kit for Astrobel Vex. If they are going to do a major release wave, maybe associated with an end edition campaign, it seems like a better chance than normal of him turning up. They do have plenty of other named characters they could choose to release if they wanted to, such as Duke Slices. As mentioned though, the one that we know that we're getting is Lady Malice, given that Games Workshop basically posted out the sprue. I had seen an unusual leak of the miniature a while back, and here's my rough recreation of the miniature by chopping the sprue up. She is in this sort of general kind of pose, though for recreation purposes I did nick the base from Lilith Hesperax. She's more based on a sort of Eldari Ruins and Wraith Construct bits. She's the Archon of the Cabal of the Poison Tongue, one of the other major forces of Commer, and does have some interesting lore with her sort of associating and packed with Segarak, the Harlequin's Laughing God. If they do a similar sort of end-year release cycle to 9th edition, then there's a pretty reasonable chance we get very few 40k codexes towards the last few months. Feels like there'd be a pretty reasonable chance that Drukhari could be one of the ones coming out in 2026. Towards the end of the year, one staple of Games Workshop release calendar tends to be 40k Christmas Battleforce box sets. Typically we've had around about 5 to 6 for Warhammer 40k each year. In general, in recent years, the theme's often been fairly good deals and big discounts, and largely focusing on more recent model releases, often with some big centerpiece miniatures they wouldn't want to put in combat patrols, so there does often tend to be at least a fair bit of hype around these guys. There's often an above average chance of big kits that came out within the preceding year or so that haven't turned up in a discount set to come out. I think there's a very high chance that we get one with Fulgrim plus some Emperor's Children in. And particularly given the Eldari didn't get a launch box set for their Aspect Warriors, I think there's a pretty reasonable chance we get some Phoenix Lords and Aspect Warriors in one box set. Otherwise, for the Space Wolves, another logical one might be Logan Grimnar with a couple of sets of Terminators perhaps. That also seems like a very possible one. And otherwise, maybe things like the Astra Militarum Deathcore of Krieg could be another possibility. Overall though, if I had to guess, Emperor's Children and Eldar seem the most likely to me, Space Wolves and Deathcore of Krieg the next, and then likely some other more wildcard ones on top of that. In the last couple of editions of Warhammer 40k, we've had a general purpose Space Marine release sometime within the last year of the edition. In 8th edition it was Shadow Spear initially coming out then, and then with the individual multi-part kits coming slightly later in the year. And then in 9th edition we had this Strike Force Agastus one, the one that introduced the Brutalis Dreadnought and everyone's favourite Space Marines with missile launchers on their missile launchers. Games Workshop certainly love their Space Marines, so it seems like a pretty reasonable chance we get something similar, and there's definitely possibilities on that front. Perhaps the single most obvious and near guaranteed are Vanguard Veterans and the Terminator Assault Squad. I feel like they could easily turn up in a box like this, so I'm sure we'll get plenty of stuff in whatever 11th edition or launch box they came out with. And if they are going full on hover tank for as many of the Space Marine motor pool as possible, we are missing some more obvious ones there, like a siege tank and artillery tank. Loads of possibilities beyond that though, a siege or ironclad dreadnought, perhaps a modern interpretation of the Landspeeder Storm. And I guess finally deciding what they're going to be doing with Tactical Marines and Devastators. Will they be updated as a distinct thing from Intercessors, as a revamped Firstborn kit to sell us, or will they stick with Intercessors and Desolation Squads? Another thing that's been confirmed to be sort of in the medium-term future are revamps for the Adeptus Custodes. They basically confirmed that they'd be getting a plastic range at their Horus Heresy launch and gave us a sneaky teaser of this Guardian Spear. This could definitely be big news for Custodes players, getting things like Caladius tanks, Telemon dreadnoughts and Venatari. Though obviously it would be quite nice if Games Workshop could provide some sort of guarantee that they aren't just going to turn around and send them all to Legends as they did with Heresy 2.0. It seems like there's plenty of other really logical things to continue with Heresy era releases though. There's the rest of the Solar Auxilia and Mechanicum to redo, and there's still a bunch of Space Marine tanks and kits they could revisit. If they do continue through the Forge World Knight range, then there's things like the Atropos, Megara and Styrex, and the Moirax. In another parallel release cycle that's usually got possibility for fun stuff, there's Kill Team releases. They usually tend to be something at least interesting for their factions, and often a chance to revisit quite a cool 40k unit with a really in-depth and higher effort kit than normal. There's been some fun stuff with things like Tank Busters, Rattlings, or the Night Lords perhaps. There's a pretty enormous amount of possibilities with what they could go on. With the precedent of the Death Corps and the Night Lord set, I feel like they could rattle through all the non-deity Chaos Legions, or the remaining Guard regiments would be pretty cool targets. It'd be really nice to see some cast chans sometime. They did have a potential lore teaser that might be hinted at Wolf Scouts. They were specifically referred to as Wolf Scout kill teams in one of their recent lore books, and they have had a recent one where they talked about World Eaters kill teams, and then we got the Jackals. Might be nothing, but we did also have a Rumour engine that looked Space Wolf specific, and that came out after their release wave. I feel like after their summer preview, they did actually clear up a fairly enormous amount of the Rumour engines that we'd seen. The Space Wolf knife thing is on the top right and does look really quite similar to other ones on their models. For another couple of fun ones that I remember though, there's this Alpha Legion Spear one. Could potentially be something like a Black Library limited edition figure for 40k, though definitely could be Heresy. And some sort of Chaos Chain type things that looked kind of similar to the Khorne Berserker ones, but certainly could be Age of Sigmar. I'm sure Necromunda will still have some occasional treats for the grim darkness of the 41st millennium as well. One of the major release waves that we know that is coming soon for them are the Palatine Enforcers. They've shown off a fairly solid wave of kits for them recently. Could be of some interest to represent some Stormtrooper variants for the Astra Militarum, or represent various flavours of Imperial agents if desired. Then to wrap up the edition, there's a fairly well established pattern of end edition campaigns now. We had the Fall of Cadia and the Gathering Storm in 7th edition, the Psyche Awakening in 8th edition, and then Arcs of Omen in 9th edition, alongside some big name character releases and their boarding action rule set. They've varied really quite dramatically as to what sort of rules content they put in them, but usually try and have an evolving story going alongside a campaign series, perhaps a chance to do something new and creative for 10th edition, and most of these have also coincided with some major lore figures getting reworked miniatures, and maybe above average chances of Primarchs turning up. Our last Primarch to come back was Fulgrim, so maybe above average chance of it being a Loyalist next. And certainly following on from the Space Wolf refresh, Leman Russ seems like a really logical choice, unless they decide to surprise us. Otherwise, in an edition where Games Workshop seem to have been removing about as much as they can from Warhammer 40k, certain characters that are fairly well loved in the lore, that didn't have their rules pulled for a fine cast miniature or a retired miniature, just feel like they've got an above average chance of coming back in a campaign like this. Perhaps some of the ones that feel like they could be most possible could be Trazyn the Infinite, Euron Blackheart, maybe Cato Sicarius or Pedro Cantor. There certainly are a fair few examples out there. I feel like Astrobel Vex could be a good name to add to that. It'd be interesting to see what sort of formats they put the rules content for this one. Will it be something mainstream for 40k, or will it be a self-contained mini expansion like Boarding Actions was? It'd be fun to see what they come up with. Talking of Primarchs, if they did want to rinse and repeat and do a Lionel Johnson but for 10th edition, it's probably his brother and rival Leman Russ. The reason that he seems highest odds to me is that his army has a fully expanded range and the others remaining do not, and that range has just been redone and attracted loads of people to jump back into the Space Wolves when they might have had a more niche following before. He's not lore dead, merely missing in mysterious circumstances, so it doesn't break the plot or mess with 40k's backstory too much to have him turn up again. I'm sure that over time they'll gradually redo all the possible ones. Lorgar and Perturabo are super easy given that they exist in the lore and are active. I'm sure no one would be surprised if Alfarius turned up again and he survived somehow. And then Jagatai, Vulcan, Corvus Corax and Leman Russ are all missing in action as opposed to having a fully confirmed kill. And out of those ones, Vulcan maybe seems like a particularly obvious choice given that he's a perpetual, so the one thing that you can basically guarantee is that he's still alive. Then after the End Edition campaign, there'll likely be 11th Edition Warhammer 40k, just under a year out at this point. If they go by their normal calendar, it should be June 2026. If they stick to their 3-year edition cycle, I really would not expect them to break that at this point. For better or worse, it does seem to have been part of the package that's propelled Warhammer 40k to a massive amounts of growth over the past 10 years or so. If I had to guess, I would suspect they'd do a soft reset for this one, so not fully invalidating codexes and rebuilding the game from the ground up. That's what they did with the translation from 8th edition through to 9th. Obviously we can't be sure, but I feel like they'd probably want to not be turning everyone's books into waste paper literally every 3 years, though I guess we'll wait and see. Again, we pretty well know how this goes at the moment. A huge launch box with Space Marines against an antagonist, and most folks have been speculating Orks, unless they decide to do a major curveball like Dark Mechanicum. The Space Marine releases seem very likely to be the end stroke of the remaining Firstborn in their range. They've been accelerating the removal and replacement of them, with another wave of Space Marine kits that probably should be enough to redo all the rest of them if they wanted. I'd guess that some of the more iconic things will have just more sort of redone appearance kind of sculpts, like the Terminators or Drop Pod, as opposed to going full on Primaris tech in some way. For the Orks, there's a whole load of kits that they have around about the 5th edition release kind of mark. They have beefed up the Orks a fair bit in terms of stature and appearance since that time. Miniatures that we get for them are likely to be big and chunky. I wouldn't be too surprised to see things like the Death Dread redone too, maybe. And then usually they have a big discount box set that goes fairly heavy on the newer units, and then they follow that up with some multi-part plastic kits, plus some other potentially bigger individual releases after that. Beyond those two, if it does indeed turn out to be Orks, there do just seem to be some release waves that seem far higher odds compared with some. The Ravenwing release for the Dark Angels almost has to happen. They're perhaps some of the last vestiges of Firstborn Space Marines en masse, and it felt at least fairly clearly to me that the 10th edition release wave felt like the Deathwing one. They've clearly got enough kits between Samael, the Black Knights, and maybe a Ravenwing Landspeeder of some sort to do a release wave, plus they need to do Ezekiel too. Grey Knights are in a similar sort of position, waiting for a sort of Primaris scaling update. I feel like they've got to be heavily odds on for 11th edition after getting so little in 10th. Fingers crossed Caldor Drago might make a return, and otherwise it feels like Kaschan Jungle Fighters seem like they're higher odds compared with most, just given that 1 edition Games Workshop's redone the Cadians, then they've had the Death Corps, and the Guard now have a bunch of absolutely ancient Kaschan Jungle Fighter kits that probably deserve to be redone first, but they didn't get that. Maybe for the Blood Angels, I'm still speculating that we'll see some actual Primaris Death Company, just given that the parts they have at the moment literally aren't Death Company models. There's only about 2 or 3 bits on the sprue that are in any way Death Company themed. I just can't imagine them planning a Blood Angels refresh and then only deciding to do Sanguinary Guard but not Death Company, and just saying that you could do that with paint. I also do wonder if we might see some more vehicle kits. 10th edition has been very infantry heavy so far. I feel like quite high up the wish list of a whole bunch of different factions will be things like Chapter or Legion specific Dreadnoughts or Hellbrutes. Things like Noise Marine Sonic Dreadnoughts or Thousand Suns Psycho ones are often popular requests, so I wonder if there's a chance Games Workshop might change up the tune on the releases front for 11th. Otherwise, there's also the possibility of new armies or things being reinterpreted. I still feel like having Vashdor around and very much active in current lore, and specifically mentioning that his forces do have Dark Mechanicum in them, just leaves it massively open for a Dark Mechanicum range release. And on previous polls that I did, it was the single highest fan request to see it added to the game. When I did a top 10 of that, they've ticked off the majority of that list over the years now. And it does make me think that they'll probably deliver on it at some time in the future. I'd guess they will happen. It's not impossible they could turn up in 10th and maybe a late Codex release. We had things like Votann and World Eaters late in the edition, or Revamped Sisters turn up back in 8th. Again, seems maybe slightly higher odds than normal. They might do a big faction release late in the edition, though if not, certainly could be an option they might explore for 11th. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to what we know of the 40k releases and rampant speculation into the future. I'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas down in the comments below. Feel free to mention anything obvious I might have missed down in the comments too. As mentioned earlier, a big thank you to Greytide Studio and their Anvil Warden upgrades for sponsoring this one. If you'd like to upgrade your power armored models into some very draconic Forge Smiths, then check out their STL files and things linked down in the video description. Lots of small bits packs if there's things that look interesting, and a big pack at a fairly reasonable price at less than $40 for all the different bits. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support them, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to check it out. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.